quick congratulations to you, Rodney.
Man, I appreciate that, Ryan. I never expected to be a grandfather, and now I have 10.
Well, I just got one advice for you. I would probably go ahead and start buying Christmas presents now.
Well, that's probably good advice, but I probably won't do it.
Okay. I got you. But yeah, the Santa Claus is going to be quite an expensive bill. So, Rodney, going back to Nick Saban, you always analyze everything that he talks about in a press conference. What is something that Nick Saban said that caught your attention the last couple of days?
Well, to be honest with you, Ryan, I didn't really necessarily think that anything caught my attention other than I thought it was the overreaction to what he said about what happened to the team down the stretch. You correct me if I'm wrong, because you probably heard a lot more of the context than I did. But I never heard him say the reason we lost to Clemson was because of this, and this. Did you?
Well, okay, so maybe he didn't say, hey, this is why we lost to Clemson, but I think a lot of the questions were formulated to ask, hey, what happened? What went wrong? And
yeah.
So that was his
And then when he gives an answer, people have a difficult time understanding, I think, what he was really saying to me. And that is that, Nick Saban's always said, it's really about us. That's really the focus. I remember when they were going to play Texas in the 2009, well, actually January of 2010 national championship game, and the Texas players were stunned because, and some of the media thought Alabama was a bit arrogant because they would always ask questions about Texas, and Alabama said, well, really, it's about us, what we do. And I think that's always the focus, in this game or at the end of last season, whatever it is. What is it that we weren't doing right? And I think that's pretty much what the answer was based on. Just that's the way I took it. Now, I may be wrong. Maybe I totally misinterpreted it. But, I think you have to look for reasons why things didn't go the way you hope they would, and things that you have to correct. And I really thought that's all that they were doing.
Rodney, when you go back and you hear Nick Saban, and we were in that room a couple of months ago when he was asked about the Alabama factor, and he talked about what's who we are. It's who we've always been. This is our MO. You go to Destin, he put an emphasis on reestablishing that. He took that same message to Hoover, Alabama, and it's not just him saying it. Now we've had a chance to talk with three players, which we haven't had the opportunity since A-Day here at Bryant-Denny Stadium. But the players are talking about reestablishing the identity, kind of going back to what worked here in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, I think so. That's certainly been something that Nick Saban's founded on since the end of last season, and I think it's basically, to me, again, it's about the singleness of purpose, the focus being as one, and doing those things that you mentioned, Ryan, that he always talks about. Everybody, working, preparing, doing all of the things, taking the next step. Not looking forward to something in the future could be a distraction, but everyone working together for the same goal and doing it the same way, with the same purpose. And I think that's something that maybe, obviously from his comments, he felt like slipped away last year, that they had people going in different directions. We talked about this on your show last year, Ryan. It really wasn't trying to, necessarily be critical of anyone, but I've never really got the impression that Tosh LaFoy, for example, was ready to be the defensive coordinator. I think there was a lot of uncertainty on that defensive side of the ball. And I said this Tuesday night on, Gary asked me on Tighter Insider TV, what was the one thing this year that I thought would be much better than what we saw last year. And I really felt like just the defensive coaching staff. I think now with the veterans that you have there, with the experience in the Nick Saban system, Sal Sunseri, Charles Kelly, and some of the other coaches that they've added, I really think this defense is, I think, going to be better coached, if you want to put it that way. I think better prepared, and I feel really confident about that.
Well, and going to the defensive side of the football, Rodney, Alabama, you and I have talked about this a lot of times, and some of that was because of injury. Some of that wasn't because of development. I mean, some of it was because you lose one of your all-star players, Terrell Lewis, in an off-season workout.
Yeah, right.
Chris Allen went down with a knee injury. But you go back, Alabama needs that alpha dog on that side of the football. I asked Dylan Moses, I said, no dancing around it. Let me just point blank ask you the question everybody wants to know. I asked him, I said, are you ready to be the alpha dog on that side of the football? And he said, I've prepared my whole entire life for it. I'm ready for this leadership role. I'm ready to embrace the leadership role. And he convinced me in 30 seconds that he was. He said, I'm ready for this role. If he is, Alabama's defense will be that defense that we've come to expect.
Well, I think, first of all, too, I want to say this, Ryan. They lost how many players, how many juniors the year before? How many? It was several on the defensive side. Well, obviously, the personnel losses have hurt. They accumulated over the last 2 years on that side of the ball. So that was certainly – I don't mean to say it was all coaching now. I mean, when you lose personnel, makes things very difficult as well. And you mentioned some of the injuries. But, as far as Dylan Moses is concerned – the one thing I would say is I believe what Dylan's saying, but I'm just still curious as to who is going to be the guy that's going to line up next to him. What kind of play are they going to get from the other inside linebacker spot? How much depth will they have there? Because, we've seen the injuries over the last few years, but still, regardless, you have to have depth. And we look at it right now, and you've got a lot of guys. Well, Josh McMillan's been around a while but hasn't played very much. Then you have a lot of the young guys. Markel Benton's been around a few years. He'll be, I think, a redshirt sophomore, so this is his third year in the program. And he hasn't played much. You've got some young players like Shane Lee, Ali Cajo, Christian Harris coming in as a true freshman. So you get the drift, Ryan. There's not a lot of experience there other than Dylan Moses. And I'll be interested to see how quickly some of these guys develop, and that could be a real key.
Rodney, Alabama was picked. There was 260 ballots that were cast from the media up in Hoover, Alabama. Now, I will say that we've only got it right 7 times since 1992 when we vote, but we're on a little bit of a streak. We're 3 out of the last 5. We've been able to get it right. They picked Alabama 2 out of 3 to repeat as SEC champions in 2019. So Alabama getting a pretty large percentage. Georgia was second at 49, LSU at 3, Mississippi State at 1. There was a drunk guy up there that voted for Tennessee and one other drunk that voted for Auburn to win the SEC. But other than that, Alabama getting the majority, 203 out of the 260.
That's pretty impressive. And again, and if you listen to some people, you wouldn't think that would have been what the media would have voted. According to some of the things you read, they seem to be thinking that Alabama's about to close shop. But regardless, I would say this, Ryan. I think Alabama clearly, if you're asking me, in the SEC West is in prime position once again to be there in Atlanta. Barring anything unforeseen. But I do think this too. And we said this a couple of times on your show, many times actually, especially when it came to recruiting. These other programs in the West, you're talking about LSU, Texas A&M especially, I would say. Those teams, those programs are really, really ramping it up. And, they're teams that now think they can compete with Alabama. And you look, Alabama has to go to College Station fairly early in the season. That's going to be an interesting game. And then, you always have LSU, and they're coming here this time. But I think the West could be a little tougher. I still see Alabama, though. And, to me, hopefully, based on what we saw last year, I thought Alabama probably wasn't quite as physical of a football team as they had been. And I think that's one thing that Nick Saban wants to get back to, and I think that will be very important in terms of winning the SEC again.
Well, Rodney, I also add this to it. It's never happened in the history of this vote. 12 players from one school on the first team, not second team, not third team, 12 players on the first team All-SEC from the University of Alabama. 12 players from Alabama recognized as preseason All-SEC. It's never happened in the history of this league.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. I mean, when you consider some of the teams that have come through, this conference that have been really good, and just think back in the '90s. I'm just trying to scatter my mind back through the years, and some of the teams that obviously Coach Bryant had. And, Steve Spurrier had some really great teams there at Florida that were loaded with talent, and to think that there's 12 first-team All-SEC players, that's pretty amazing, Ryan, and that's probably why they got 203 of that 200 and whatever it was votes to win the SEC because of what they've got, not only talent-wise, but obviously, Nick Saban, but just a loaded team. There's no question. I'm going to be really interested, Ryan. I can't really wait till we have the opportunity to walk in the gate that first day and just look at this team 1 to 85 and kind of size them up and see how they look on the hoof, because you know this as well as I do, Ryan. Many years we've walked in there, and it's looked like we're walking into an NFL mini camp. So I'm really excited to be able to see what this team looks like.
Well, and I asked one of the players how would he describe this offseason, and he said hard work. He said you don't have to convince anybody that they need to get in the training room and in the gym and to be able to go through the Scott Cochran. He said it's been a lot of self-discipline. He said it's been a lot of hard work this offseason. That's what you want to hear. Rodney, can we take to recruiting here for just a couple of minutes? Because I want to go back probably 2.5 months. And you're always the finger on the pulse when we talk about recruiting, the way that you cover it. And Clemson was beginning to separate everybody from Alabama, and everybody. They were pulling ahead, and everybody was talking about, man, this is the greatest class, and nobody's going to be able to close the gap. Well, you kept saying, don't do that yet. Be patient. Well, Alabama has closed the gap, and in some polls, they've actually went past Clemson. I'd like to get your thoughts in the last couple of days and what it's been like as Alabama gathers a lot of momentum in the recruiting side of things.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing, really, what they're doing with several new coaches. I think that's the first thing you have to do, Ryan, is you have to really commend the coaching staff. Obviously they've done a tremendous job of evaluating, and some of these coaches have really beat the path pretty hard. They've got some outstanding commitments. And you mentioned the two this week. Tim Smith, I've always really liked him quite a bit as a defensive lineman. He's about 6'4", 340 out of Sebastian, Florida. And he's a pretty dominant player, has a chance to be a pretty dominant player. So I'm really excited about him. And you start throwing in these defensive linemen, Ryan, with that group they signed last year, and you're starting to see now the numbers had slipped on that defensive line over the last couple of years, especially last year. But now you're starting to see with the group they brought in last year, this group they're bringing in this year, Alabama's getting back to that high number of really top quality defensive linemen. And I think that's a difference. Also, commitment from Christian Story. He's an excellent athlete, all-around athlete from Lynette. And he's a high school quarterback, put up big numbers, but he also plays safety. Just a great athlete. And I think that most project him eventually to be a safety in college, and I think he's fine with that. And so those are two really big pickups. And, Ryan, I think what's exciting, if you look at Alabama and what they have, is I don't think they're close to being finished. And that was part of a big article I did today. When you start looking at Alabama's recruiting class right now, and let's just assume that everything stays the way it is with who they've got, and maybe there's a few that end up elsewhere, but I'm talking about the prime guys that they have committed. Everything stays the same. And you start projecting ahead to some of these guys that it looks like they can get, the question starts to become just how good can this Alabama class be? If the Clemson class was, quote, unquote, going to be the greatest ever, and Alabama ends up surpassing them, then, just how good could this class be?
Right now, the breakdown is Alabama, 8 from the state of Alabama, 5 from Georgia, 3 from Florida, 2 from Texas, 1 from California, 1 from Maryland, 1 from Mississippi, 1 from Ohio. And as you talked about it, and I want to go back because we opened up the conversation talking about the Bama factor and reestablishing Look at where he's building this class, as you said, 5 defensive linemen, 3 offensive linemen. That's where you win football games, in the trenches, and that's been the history here in Tuscaloosa. Yeah, you've got skill position guys, but he's built it because he's had better guys on the line of scrimmage.
You're right, and I think too, when you look at last year, we felt all along that Alabama would probably have the number 1 offensive and number 1 defensive line classes in America, and I think it, if you just look at the ratings, if that's what you go by, then it panned out. But regardless, even if you want to look at just, the players individually, look at them on the hoof, look at their potential. If you kind of study it a little bit, you see that they signed some really high quality players on both sides of the line of scrimmage. And that's, to me, that's where the difference usually plays out.
Hey, Rodney, I always appreciate your time, and it's always fun to be able to catch up and talk Alabama. Let me slip in one question, just one question. I'm sorry, I wrote this down. I forgot to ask. They said when I get you on, you see a quarterback in this class? Because right now they don't have a quarterback in this class. Do you see Alabama taking a quarterback in 2019?
Yeah, I would think so. That was part of our story today, too, on TighterInsider.com, and it's I feel like Alabama has a outstanding chance, legitimate chance, however you want to phrase it, to flip USC 5-star commit Bryce Young. I think that he's very impressed with Alabama. I think his family is very impressed with Alabama. I do think he's played his cards close to the vest. I think he's been very respectful to USC. But I do think that he is, even though it's not really a highly publicized deal, I do think that he is giving strong consideration to Alabama. So I'd keep my eye on Bryce Young. He's from Santa Ana, California, modern-day high school. They were the number 1 high school team in the country last year.
Rodney Orr, TighterInsider.com, TighterInsider.com, at the website, comprehensive coverage of the Alabama Crimson Tide. Also, TITV, WVUA, 23, Tuesday at 6:30 and 10:30 on the replay with Gary Harris, WVUA 23 here locally in Tuscaloosa and throughout the state on the satellite channels as well. Rodney, as always, thank you so much for your time. I hope you have a great weekend. Thank you again.
Appreciate it, Ryan. Take care.